carry that thing on the road was a waste of time, was a waste of energy, so that's one of the first things that I threw away. And the first night, it was very hard pulling this sled. And when you stopped, the wood would freeze the ground, and then you'd have a hard time breaking it loose. And all night long we had nothing to eat, no shelter. So we'd chip off little chunks of this ersatz honey and put it in our mouth and let it melt. And after 5 or 10 pieces of that ersatz honey, you got to hate the stuff. So for 15, 20 years after I got back from this prison camp, I could not stand the taste of honey. And if anything tasted like honey, it just turned me completely off, you know. It was terrible. But, it did give us some energy, I guess. And, we started walking, and we'd walk for 50 minutes and have a 10-minute break. And then every once in a while, you'd be walking and you'd hear shots being fired. And, apparently there were Russian guerrillas or whatever over there shooting at us, shooting at the Germans, and we were in the middle. The Germans were shooting back. Anyhow, there were shots being fired. We never knew who was shooting at who, but at that period we'd just sit down on the ground hoping that they wouldn't shoot at us. And I had a couple blankets, I guess, that I put over my head. And so we walked. Now there was a blizzard going on, very cold. And when I walked, I would perspire. My feet would perspire, and when I stopped to rest, perspiration would freeze between my toes. This was happening to everybody, of course, and some of the fellows were not surviving as well as I was. I had several extra pair of socks, and when I stopped, I would change my socks, take off the dry socks, take off the wet socks, put on the dry socks, and pin the wet socks on my shoulder to dry as I walked. And at one of the breaks while I was resting, I fell asleep, I guess. I reached up to check to see if my socks were dry. I felt the pin there, but the socks were gone. While I was sleeping, somebody who needed a pair of socks stole them right off my shoulder. Now these were officers, you know, American officers, you know, and this is what was happening. I mean, it was desperation. We were also told to carry little boxes of whatever we had, of cookies, or little pieces of chocolate. We used to carry them in little, have a little box in one pocket and another little box in the other pocket of cookies or prunes, whatever you might have saved while you were getting packages from the Red Cross. So I had a couple of packages, and I had resisted eating for quite a while. And finally, I decided, well, I'd start taking a few of my cookies and prunes, whatever. And I reached in the pocket, and the box was there, but all the food was gone. Someone stole every piece of food right out of my pocket, and I didn't even know it. One of my fellow officers, maybe wasn't even from my room. I don't think the fellows in the room would have done this to each other, but someone stole the food right out of my pocket. So now the Germans weren't giving us anything to eat, any shelter. So for about 3 days and 3 nights, we just walked along. Some of the fellows were going really having like nervous breakdowns, and there was a wagon being pulled by some horses. The first night the horses collapsed and fell down on the road. They couldn't walk anymore. So it was pathetic on everybody's part. There were a lot of civilians also on the road. Now the civilians were deathly afraid of the Russians, so the civilians were trying to flee away from the Russians also, so this was a pathetic situation. So after about the second or third day, the Germans made a big kettle of soup, and of course you can't get soup in your hand, and they didn't have bowls or whatever. You had to have a tin can or something to get the soup. So we were called Kriegies, Kriegi meaning war. Kriegsgefangene. Amerikanische Kriegsgefangene. Kriegsgefangene is what we were. American prisoners of war. Amerikanische Kriegsgefangene. So we were Kriegies. And Kriegies were fellows that tried to utilize everything they could, like tin cans, make dishes out of tin cans, carried an extra tin can to use as a cup. And thank God I had a tin can in order to get some soup. So that was the first food. Then we came to a little town called Spremberg, and it was they put us in this big building that used to have tanks, whatever, in it. And the floor was sloppy wet with grease and water. And to stay dry, I climbed up on some cabinets that were 6 feet off the ground, moved them out from the wall. They were about 8 inches wide, and I fell asleep on these cabinets. If I would have turned over, I would have fallen 6 feet to the floor, but I told myself, don't fall off the cabinet, and I slept up there most of the night, I guess. So after a couple days of that sort of pathetic situation, they put us on trains, which were boxcars. They were small boxcars, about 40, 50 prisoners would sit on one half of the boxcar, and 6 or 8 German guards would have the other half of the boxcar with their guns. Before we got on the boxcar, I was picked to help bring German bread up to the supply car. So I had about 12 loaves of German bread in my arm, piled up, and my buddy was already in the boxcar. So I walked over close to the boxcar, and he reached out, grabbed 2 loaves of the bread, and then I proceeded to keep going up to the German supply car to put the bread in. So we ended up, thank God, with 2 loaves of bread, which we divided up amongst a lot of the prisoners that were there. We took us a couple days, I guess, to go from where we were to Nuremberg. Meanwhile, I think we were strafed at least once or twice by American pursuit planes that didn't know who we were, but they saw something moving and they would strafe anything they saw moving. Even when we were walking, we were strafed a couple of times. We had to run off the road and jump into the ditch. But, so finally we get to Nuremberg prison camp, which was close to railroad yards and I guess maybe a couple miles from the city proper. Now this was a very filthy camp. It was, they had Italian prisoners before we got there. I don't know what they did with the Italian prisoners, but we were, I guess, considered more valuable than Italian prisoners, so they got rid of them somehow. And we were put in these barracks, and we weren't allowed out of the barrack at night. Now this was a period of rapid starvation where we were getting practically nothing to eat. One day they brought in a bucket of rotten potatoes and dumped it on the floor, and they said, divide it up. Well, you look at these rotten potatoes and say, you can't eat that. That's rotten potatoes, you know. So you'd rather starve than eat rotten potatoes. You spent practically most of the day laying in a bunk, which was like little pigeonholes. You had to crawl in from the end. And but you're in such a pathetic situation that all you wanted to do was sleep and hunt for something to eat.
What was happening to some of the guys that were sort of going crazy on the trip over for 3 days?
Well, they would drop out, and of course no one knew where they ended up or what would happen to them, whether they were allowed to go to a hospital or whether they were maybe shot as trying to escape or whatever. One of these days I hope to get with some of my old buddies and talk a little bit more about this. Maybe some of these books that I bought that I haven't read completely yet will tell me a little bit more of what actually went on. But it was super pathetic. Frostbitten feet and whatever. Another thing, we weren't allowed out to the latrine at night. What they had was a big 50-gallon garbage can at each end of the barracks, and if you had to go to the toilet, which everyone was sick with dysentery, you had to go out and squat over this 50-gallon can, and that's where you did your business, whatever. And that was kind of pathetic. I was bitten by a mouse or a rat who probably thought I was dead, and I went to a fellow who had a couple Band-Aids. I showed him where I was bitten, and I says, what should I do about this? And he looked at it, he said, oh, it doesn't look so bad. So he didn't even bother wasting a Band-Aid or a drop of iodine on my bite. He says it'll heal up by itself. So that's the kind of medical attention us officers were receiving. But as I recall, Adolf Hitler at this point was saying to the German people that they should actually execute all prisoners. They should slaughter all the cattle and keep the grain for human consumption. This is what I remember. I haven't seen it written anywhere, but of course the camp was run by the Wehrmacht, which is a German regular army, and they knew that if they did anything like that, that sooner or later the war would be over and Germany was losing. They would be held accountable for killing American officers and American soldiers, so they did not do that. Although we did go in for a shower one time into a shower room, and we took off all our clothes, went into the shower room, and we were in there about 5 minutes, and they never turned on the water, and then 5 minutes later they said, no water, go out. So I don't know, maybe they had plans to give us gas at that point, and they decided to change their mind. But here again, I'll have to talk to some of my old buddies to see what they remember of this situation. But it was very pathetic. We were all sick and colds. Oh, and then even worse, Nuremberg was a prime target for the RAF and a prime target for the 8th Air Force. And for about 3 days, the 8th Air Force, B-17s, etc., B-24s were coming over bombing Nuremberg. And during the night, the RAF would come over and they were bombing Nuremberg. Well, being a ex-B-17 crewman, I realized that if the B-17 bombardier pilot, if they missed their target dropping, they would look for a target of opportunity, and they would look down and see this camp, and although we were a prison camp, the fellows in the B-17 who probably weren't paying attention to their briefings would take us and drop bombs on us, and there were bomb craters all around this camp. So we were deathly afraid that we were going to be bombed by our own RAF or our own 8th Air Force, or at night by the RAF. So we asked permission to dig trenches. So we, during these air raids, at least at night, we would be able to get into these trenches, and we wouldn't get killed, And so they did. We either were allowed or we just went ahead and did it. And so we dug trenches, and I spent a couple of nights watching fantastic air raids where the RAF would come over and they were being shot. Some of them were being shot down by anti-aircraft. And one night, before the raid started, the first RAF planes that come over dropped flares all around our camp. And we said, oh my God, they think we're a German military camp. They're putting flares out here to light us up as a target. Well, what they must have done was put flares around and told their air people, do not drop in this area, because they didn't drop, thank God, in the area where they outlined with the flares. So, now the 8th Air, or the General Patton's 3rd Army now was advancing in this area, towards this area. And the Germans still didn't want to surrender us. So in order not to surrender us, they put us on a road walking south to a new camp called Moosburg, which I think was about 80, 90 miles south. And Kelly Palumbo, my buddy, and I, we, one dark night, we decided to slip away. Now, there was thousands of prisoners who would be walking along these roads, and there was guards, of course, but there wasn't enough guards to watch every prisoner. So one dark night, we were in this little town, going through this little town, and we just slipped away and hid out in a little dog kennel, or it was some kind of an animal kennel with no animals. So we hid in there until the group of prisoners had gone by.
They were marching to another prison camp?
We were all walking south to this other prison camp. But I was so upset with the terrible treatment we got in the Nuremberg camp, I thought, well, the next camp would be just as bad or worse. And I'd rather take a chance of just... now this was in Bavaria, going through Bavaria, farm country. And actually the people that I had met along the way seemed friendly. And I could speak, thank God, a little German. And I could make myself understood with the civilians we met. I also had a carton of cigarettes that my mother and father had sent to me, and I never smoked, so I had these cigarettes to use to barter with, to get an egg for a cigarette or a half a loaf of bread or whatever. So I was able to talk to the German civilians to some extent, and friendly, and make a little trade now and then.
What would they have done if they saw you slipping away?
Well, we never knew that if we were picked up by the Gestapo, they would have thrown us in a jail and beat the heck out of us, maybe. If we would have been picked up by the guards, they could have shot us, or just forced us to come back into the group. But Kelly and I, we try to keep fairly close to the road that the prisoners were supposed to be walking on. And if anybody asked us what we were doing, he had a natural limp from a football injury, and he would accentuate his limp. And I would say I was traveling with him. He couldn't keep up with the group, and we were following. I used to say, "Der Hauptmann sagt für uns," to follow behind, you know. And if you mention to anyone that the Hauptmann, the German officer, said, immediately they would say, oh, if the German officer said, the Hauptmann said, then it's okay, you know. So this was our story. Der Hauptmann said, sagt für uns to do this, you know, to follow behind, you know. So when we ran into somebody who was questioning us, we'd say that little sentence, and we got past, got by. And We got to this one little village, and in Bavaria, the farmers all have farms on the outskirts, and they come back to little villages where they live, a house and a barn, a house and a barn, a house and a barn, and a big opening in the center, you know, and maybe a few stores. Well, we got to this one little village, and there was a baker shop, butcher shop, side by side, and we were in the back of these two shops, and somehow we contacted the butcher and the baker, and I was all set to make a big deal to get some bread, cookies, maybe a pie, some butter. We never able to get butter. We were going to get some butter, and I had the cigarettes. We were all set to make this big trade. And up comes this sailor on crutches who was home on leave because he was injured in the war.
A German sailor?
German soldier, sailor. And he saw us there, and he saw what was going on, and he had a pistol. He pulled out his pistol, and he started screaming at us and waving the pistol at us. You know, so he could have shot us right there. But I put on my best smile, and I said, "Wie geht's, mein Herr? Mein Freund." Then I gave him my story about their Hauptmannschaft, you know, we are going. I said, we are going, you know. So he's still screaming and yelling, and meanwhile the baker and the butcher or whoever is there, they go in and close their doors, you know, and they lock us. They want nothing more to do with us. So Kelly and I just turned around and walked away from this guy while he's still waving the pistol at us. And thank God he didn't shoot us, and we got away. So we kept going, and meanwhile, I had a German canteen, and chickens in Bavaria lay eggs all over the place. They run kind of loose, and they have nests here and there. And we were able to pick up a lot of eggs. You know, we'd steal them, actually. So I hear this chicken making a cock-a-doodle-doo, you know, like it's just, a hen just laid an egg. So I go over and I see this nest, and there's 3 eggs. Or maybe it was 2 eggs, 3 eggs. Anyhow, I reach in and I get my hand over the 3 eggs. And they're warm because this chicken was on the eggs. And as I reach in from this side, there's another fellow, prisoner. He's reaching in from the other side. His hand goes over my hand, but I have the eggs. So I figure, oh hell, I can afford to part with these eggs. I already had a bunch of eggs in my canteen. I'd break the egg and put the egg in the canteen, you know, throw the shell away. So I let him have, I guess he got 2 of the eggs and I got 1 of the eggs. And as soon as we got him, we kept going because we didn't want the farmer to catch us stealing his eggs. And I get maybe 100 yards away, and I look at my egg, and it's a funny looking egg. It's made of porcelain. It wasn't a real egg. And what the farmers do, they put in these porcelain eggs to try to encourage the hen to lay more eggs. See, well, I gave him the good egg, apparently, and I got the porcelain egg, which I ended up throwing away. So Kelly and I were in this little town, and it's pretty easy to get around, actually, because in this area they had so many prisoners. They had French prisoners, Russian prisoners, Polish prisoners, every nationality you could think of, and we just looked like a prisoner, you know, like a farm prisoner. So we just pretended like we were farm prisoners, you know. We pretended like we knew what we were doing, and...
What's a farm prisoner?
Huh?
What's a farm prisoner?
Well, a prisoner that worked on the farm.
Oh, okay.
They had all these prisoners working on the farms.
And at this point, too, the German people were starting to get a little friendlier, maybe, towards prisoners,
well,
because...
Yeah, they whenever I identified myself to a civilian, most civilians were friendly, especially the farmers. In fact, they would ask us, "Well, come stay with us," because they knew that the American armed forces were coming. Now we could help protect them against the armed forces, the Allies. But we were afraid to go stay anywhere one place because we didn't know whether they were saying the right thing. Maybe they'd call in the Gestapo or somebody, and then we'd end up getting all beat up. So we're in this cozy little town. Now it's already springtime. It's warming up, and we're throwing away our heavy clothes, giving them away. Oh, we threw away that there piece of lamb the first night that we had, and we all start carrying our own packages. But anyhow, I had a can of beans, came from Argentina. These were uncooked beans, and I had them in water, and I carried them day after day after day. And every time we had a chance, I would light a little fire, and I'd put this can of beans on that fire, and then the water would warm up a little bit, and then we'd have to move. And after about a week or two of that, I tried tasting one of the beans. It was still solid like a rock, you know. So I ended up giving it away to somebody. I said, "Would you like some beans?" Here. I gave him the can of beans just to get rid of them. But I had this canteen full of eggs, and Kelly and I were in this, sitting on a curb on this little town. And anyway, we see coming up the road is a whole bunch of German soldiers in a unit. Oh my God, let's get out of here. So we both get up very gingerly and walk away. But I walk away and I leave the canteen of eggs sitting down where I was by the curb. Oh shit. Kelly, I forgot the eggs. He said, "Shall we go back?" He says, "Kelly, the German soldiers are going to be there now. They may be already found the eggs." So we let the eggs go. But we still had extra stuff. And we keep going. And we go to this farmhouse. And it's noontime. We rap at the door. And the people in there are having their noonday meal. And we can hear them saying their prayers, you know. And they're ignoring us, so we figure, well, they don't want to be friendly, we'll get out of here. So we kept going. The next farm we came to, we said we had some eggs and some bread. We wanted to cook it on our stove. We went and make some tea. We had tea. We had some cigarettes we'd give them. And they invited us in. Now they had about 3 beautiful daughters, or beautiful young women there, who were being very friendly. You know, and Kelly and I thought, oh, we really hit it good here, boy, this is going to be great. And so we're starting to cook, and the girls are helping us, you know. Then we hear a rap at the door, and there's about 3 or 4 German soldiers. They want to stay at this farmhouse. And the way the German army travels, they are allowed to, if they need a place to spend the night, to go to any house, anywhere, rap the door, and the people have to take them in and provide them shelter. So these guys apparently knew that there were some nice looking gals in this farmhouse, and they rapped at the door, and they wanted to come in and spend the night there, and they wanted to have their dinner there. And they see us, and they just point at us and they say, "Raus, raus." I mean, they didn't want to have anything to do with us except get us out, make us leave. So we left, eggs and all. We left everything.
And lost all your stuff?
Yeah.
They were Nazi soldiers or Wehrmacht?
Well, they were German soldiers. They were an SS. We're not SS. The SS would have probably, they would have maybe shot us or whatever. They would have done something terrible to us, maybe.
That's what I thought that.
In a little town, I kind of remember it as being called Riegersdorf. And some German, or some American prisoners of war had made a deal with the burgermeister that if they were allowed to stay in this town, the burgermeister would feed them. When the American forces, armed forces, came through, the Third Army, these prisoners of war would help to protect the town from being destroyed. And they would point out that the burgermeister was very kind to let them stay there. So Kelly and I decided, well, gee, this is great. We'll just stay here with these guys. And I still remember there was the most beautiful young blonde-haired, I guess she was a Polish prisoner maybe. She was standing up to her ankles in cow manure with a pitchfork, throwing this cow manure up into a wagon. And I thought, gee, how can they get such a beautiful young woman to do such a terrible job of standing in cow manure and throwing it into a wagon? But we didn't stick around too long to talk to her. I guess I didn't try even, because you never know whether you're going to get into trouble that way. But there was a saloon there, and we got our first glass of German beer from this saloon, somehow or other. So everything looked real rosy for about a half a day or a day, until a German army unit came through and said to us, "What are you doing here?" And we said, "We cannot walk, we are injured." And the prison camp was about another 10 miles down the road, this Moosburg. So they had each one of us looked at by this German doctor, army doctor, and he certified that we were healthy enough to be moved to the next camp. But we said we couldn't walk, so they got wagons. So they put us on wagons, and they took us by wagons down to the next prison camp, which is called Moosburg. And Moosburg was a gigantic camp with every nationality you could think of. But the Germans would have all the Russians in one area, all the Americans in another area, all the South Americans in another area, and all the Africans in another area. And then they would try to talk the Americans into being a guard over the Russians, or the Russians being a guard over the Americans. And of course, you know, we knew better than that. If we started to work for the Germans, we would be traitors. So we never did anything like that. But we were getting, I guess, about a bowl of German soup a day, and the German soup was more like water than soup. And we were getting maybe a couple pieces of bread, and but it was something. And we were there, I guess, a couple of weeks. When Patton's Third Army comes through, the Germans leave, we are liberated. So the British were smart. They moved in force into the nearest town and told the burgermeister of that town to take care of them until they could go back to England. Americans told us, "Stay here and we will fly you back to England in 3 days." Well, the thing the Americans didn't do was to provide us with anything to eat. They come in and the Germans left, the Americans left, and here we are, we're in worse shape now than we were before. There was absolutely nothing. We weren't even getting a bowl of, or a can of watered down soup or a piece of stale bread. We were getting nothing. So Kelly and I and a couple others walked into the nearest town, and the civilians in there were being friendly and asking us to come in and stay with them. Meanwhile, the Russians were there ripping off everything they could rip off, the Poles or whatever, stealing everything, motorcycles, cows. They could walk back to Poland from where they were. And the civilians actually wanted us, Americans, to stay with them so we could protect them against the other prisoners, the Russian prisoners and the Polish prisoners, whatever, that were ripping off everything.
How did you know all this, that they wanted you to do that? I mean, could you understand them?
You could figure it out, you know, that you could see that that the Russians and the Poles and the other prisoners were stealing everything they could steal, motorcycles, automobiles. Even Americans were acting loony, walking back to camp with big clocks on their back, you know, stealing things. And I said, this is insane. So if you steal something, how are you ever going to get it back to the United States? I mean, if it's a heavy thing, there's no way to get it back, and why should you do it? So Kelly and I, we went back, and I guess maybe Murray Lirette was with us at this point, and another fellow, Cliff Jones, who I went through navigation school with. So we go back and we say to ourselves, well, we're not getting anything to eat here. There are no more guards around. The Americans aren't doing anything for us. Let's hit the road and get back to France. So we go out on the road, and we know to get back, we should go back through, go north, and then go west. So we hitchhike on army trucks that seem to be going by, you know, anything go by. So we got on this one truck, and he goes about 10 miles into the next town. And here we find thousands of German soldiers that have surrendered. And they're prisoners. And the German Hauptmann that was in charge of our camp, he's sitting right there in front of this building that we pulled up in front of. And I yelled to him, I say, hi, Hauptmann Adler, I think his name was. Wie geht's? How are you? So he asked permission to come over to talk to us. So he did. He came over with a pad and a pencil. He says, please write a note that when you were my prisoner, I took good care of you. I says, no, you did not take good care of us, but you will be taken good care of by the Americans. I said, there's no need for us to write you a note, but you did not take good care of us, you know. So he went back, and we went on our way up to Frankfurt, and through these towns that were bombed out, and the destruction was amazing. And so one night we hitchhiked with a black fella who was driving this big trailer truck with no just a flatbed. And we asked him, we said, where are you going? He says, I'm going through Luxembourg and I'm going to Reims. And we knew that we were supposed to go to Reims to get reinstated back into the armed forces. So he says, could we go with you? He says, you could stay on the flatbed truck back in the back. Meanwhile, he's up in the main part by himself, you know. He didn't trust us, you know, which I guess he had reason to.
Is he a German black man?
No, he was a American. These are American soldiers you're traveling around. And he would stop here and there, and he'd go into bars, and I don't know what he was doing, but he was doing something. But we didn't ask him any questions. We slept, we crawled, there was a big tarp on the back of this truck. We laid under this tarp while he's going maybe 50 miles an hour, hitting these big ruts and bomb craters. And we're laying on that flatbed. And to show how tough we were, we would bounce a couple inches up and down on this hardwood floor of the truck, of the flatbed. But as I remember, I fell asleep and I slept like a baby, even though we were bouncing along.
How did he get a truck? If he was an American?
He was what they call red ball. These were army trucks, and he was on a mission. He was going from one place to another. I don't know. We didn't ask him any questions. He didn't want to even talk to us. He stopped in Luxembourg, in the heart of Luxembourg. He got out a little skillet and a little burner, and he cooked himself some food. We had some bread stuff. We ate what we had. He gave us nothing. And then we went on our way, you know. And finally, somehow, we get to Reims, which is where we were supposed to report back into. And so we report in, and they take all of our clothes and everything we had, give us a bath. We take a bath and a shower, and they so-called de-lice us. I don't remember ever having lice or anything, because I always, even though we didn't have showers, I was always able to keep clean somehow. And one of the worst things, I had a good pair of GI shoes, excellent shoes. They took my good shoes, and they gave me a pair of German rebuilt shoes with iron cleats on the bottom, that if you stepped in water, the water would go right through the whole thing. They weren't waterproof at all, but my GI shoes were. I was so sorry to lose those good shoes. But at least I had clean clothes, $88. I had about $4,000 that they owed me for a year's pay or so. It was flight pay and everything else. But they wouldn't give us the money. They only give us $88.
Where'd you get those good GI shoes from? Were those the ones you had from when you were captured?
Somehow the Salvation Army, or the Red Cross or somebody, before things got bad, the first few months, they had this clothing sent in, and either that or I had the good GI shoes from when I was shot down. I don't remember for sure. But anyhow, when I checked back after I went to be liberated, or checked back where you're supposed to check into, they took my good GI shoes and gave me these beat up old German shoes, which I kept for years, and I finally threw them away. But then they sent us down to the Havre to wait for a boat. The Havre is a seaport in France. Now the Havre has a bunch of tents, and it's springtime, and every place you look is mud. And to get something to eat, you had to stand in a big line and wait for about half an hour, and then they'd only give you a little bit. Then to get more food, you had to go back and stand in line again, because they figured our bellies were shrunken so much from starvation that if we ate too much, it would kill us. In fact, there were stories that some ex-POW went to a Red Cross coffee and donut wagon and ate too many donuts and killed himself. I mean, accidentally, of course. You know, he just ate so much he killed himself. He died. So they didn't want us to kill ourselves by eating too much, which Kelly and I, we had no desire to overeat, but we did want to eat a full meal. So, and we looked down in the harbor, and there's no boat. So we said, hey, here we are in France. We haven't seen anything yet. We haven't been to Paris. So we say, well, let's go to Paris. There's no boat here. We're just sitting around in this old Lucky Strike camp is what they call it, mud hole. Let's see if we can go to Paris. So without asking anybody, he and I go up to the local airfield, and we hitchhike our ride on an airplane that is flying close to Paris. So they give us a ride. Then we get there, and somehow or other we get into Paris. And we get, Kelly, I don't know why, but when we got to Paris, he said he had to go see somebody or something, I don't know, but somehow we got parted. He went his way and I went my way. And he was older, he was married. He apparently knew something about Paris that I didn't know about.
Yeah, where the girls were.
he maybe knew where the hot spots are. He's 80 years old, by the way, now. I'm 73 going on 74, so he's 6 years older than me.
So maybe he wanted to get a little action in before you got back.
I don't know. I can't accuse him of that. But somehow or other, we were parted somehow. And I did the regular touristy things. I went up to the Eiffel Tower and to see Napoleon's tomb and the big church, what do they call it? Anyhow. We would go to get food. We'd go to the local food where the army had. The army was running everything at this point. You could go on any train, no fare. if you went into a restaurant, you'd have to buy your food if you went in a regular restaurant. Subway systems were great. I went to a few shops, and I went to see the Follies Bergeret. That's about the wildest thing I did while I was there. There were plenty of girls around trying to sell their wares, and beautiful, beautiful girls, but I didn't want to come back with any permanent disabilities. So I was a good boy, and I'm still glad I was. Anyhow, there was a night train back to where we had to go to the Havre, and it was pathetic, the things that happened. The trains over there, you can't walk from one coach to one section to another. They're broken into a bunch of sections that you get into a section and you have to stay in that section till you get wherever